Dion reclined inside his clay jar, the curved walls amplifying his voice as he muttered, "Ah, the minimalist lifestyle. Living unjarred." His sarcastic musings echoed across the bustling alien metropolis of Taraxia, where the locals, shimmering in their ornate, vase-like exoskeletons, cast bewildered glances his way. Taraxians prized opulence, and the sight of a human squatting in a crude jar was the equivalent of seeing royalty eating off paper plates. A small crowd had gathered, their curiosity piqued by this peculiar human's choice of residence. "He claims it's cultural," one alien whispered. Another snorted, "Cultural? It's absurd. Where's the dignity in such cramped conditions?" "Dignity," Dion called out, eavesdropping shamelessly. "Overrated. It's all about simplicity. You wouldn't understand, you're too boxed in." He chuckled at his own pun, watching the aliens tilt their heads in confusion, unsure if they'd been insulted. Word of the strange human philosopher had reached Queen Vaisura, ruler of Taraxia. Towering and regal, her exoskeleton gleamed like polished porcelain, each curve meticulously adorned with intricate carvings. She arrived with her entourage, their golden armor clinking rhythmically as they approached. Vaisura stopped a few paces from the jar, her imposing figure casting a shadow over Dion's modest dwelling. "You are the human called Dion?" she asked, her voice resonant with authority. Dion peered up at her, unimpressed. "Depends. Are you the queen called Vaisura, or is that just a clever nickname?" He grinned, his tone as casual as if he were addressing a neighbor rather than a monarch. Her advisors bristled, but Vaisura raised a hand to silence them. "I am Queen Vaisura, and I am here to understand your philosophy." "My philosophy?" Dion repeated, sitting up. "Lady, I just live in a jar." "That's not a philosophy, it's a real estate decision." "Fascinating," she replied earnestly, completely missing his sarcasm. "What wisdom do you glean from such simplicity?" Dion stroked his chin theatrically. "Well, for starters, no property taxes. Plus, when you're this cozy, it's impossible to lose your keys." The queen's mandibles twitched, a gesture her people used to signify deep thought. "And what do you mean by unjarred?" she asked. "Is it some profound human concept?" "Sure," Dion said, smirking. "It means I'm free. Not tied down. No lids, no limits." He paused dramatically, enjoying the look of confusion on her face. "It's all very deep." Vaisura nodded as if she'd just unlocked a universal truth. "Your way of life intrigues me, Dion of the Jar. Perhaps there's more to humanity than I anticipated." "Well, we're full of surprises," Dion said, leaning back. "Some bigger than others." Her advisors murmured amongst themselves, clearly unamused by his flippant attitude. Vaisura ignored them, her gaze fixed on Dion. "As queen, I wish to honor your unique perspective. If you could have one wish granted, what would it be?" Dion raised an eyebrow. "One wish, huh? Okay, I'll bite. I wish for a partner who can think outside the box." The aliens froze. Vaisura's mandibles twitched rapidly, a sign of excitement. "A partner who can think outside the box," she repeated, her voice almost a whisper. Dion nodded, oblivious to the weight of his words. "Yep. Someone who gets me. You know, someone who doesn't mind a little mess, likes a good joke, and maybe doesn't take life so seriously." The queen stood tall, her posture regal yet determined. "Then your wish shall be granted." Dion blinked. "Wait, what?" Before he could protest, Vaisura turned to her advisors. "Prepare the necessary arrangements. I will personally ensure this wish is fulfilled." "Personally," one advisor sputtered. "But, Your Majesty." "Silence," she commanded. "I have made my decision." She looked back at Dion, her eyes gleaming with resolve. "You have given me much to consider, Dion of the Jar. I will return shortly." As the queen and her entourage departed, Dion slumped back into his jar, bewildered. "Well, that escalated quickly," he muttered. "What did I just get myself into?" Dion lounged in his jar, tossing a small alien fruit between his hands as the bustling marketplace continued to gawk at him. He'd started to enjoy the attention. After all, it wasn't every day that an entire civilization was baffled by a man living in glorified pottery. But when Vaisura returned, her presence silenced the murmurs instantly. This time, her entourage carried trays of gleaming alien artifacts, which they set around the jar like offerings to a deity. "Dion of the jar," Vaisura announced, her tone formal yet laced with something softer, "I have considered your wish for a partner who can think outside the box. It is a challenge, but one I am prepared to meet." He squinted at her, unsure whether to laugh or run. "You're taking this pretty seriously, huh?" "It is my duty as queen," she replied, stepping closer. "And I believe I may be the partner you seek." Dion nearly choked on the fruit he'd been chewing. "You? That's not exactly what I meant." "Silence," she said, raising a hand. "I understand humans value directness. So I, Vaisura, Queen of Taraxia, shall personally fulfill your wish." She gestured grandly to the gathered crowd. "Let this be a union of mutual understanding between our species." The crowd erupted in polite applause, though many looked thoroughly scandalized. Dion, on the other hand, was too stunned to react. Wait, he said, holding up his hands. "I think there's been a—" "You need not explain," Vaisura interrupted. "Your desire for a partner who can think beyond traditional confines resonates deeply with me. I am prepared to match your intellect and embrace your simplicity." Dion sighed, rubbing his temples. "Okay, I feel like we're on two different wavelengths here. When I said partner, I didn't mean—" "Enough," she declared. "Tonight, we shall celebrate this new bond." And with that, she marched away, leaving Dion flabbergasted. The crowd dispersed, murmuring excitedly about the queen's boldness. Dion, still reeling, muttered to himself, "This is why you don't make jokes to royalty." That evening, Dion found himself seated at a grand banquet table, surrounded by alien nobles. The table was laden with exotic dishes, most of which he couldn't identify. Vaisura sat at the head, her gaze fixed on him with what he could only describe as regal intensity. "This is a lot," Dion muttered, poking at a gelatinous blob that jiggled menacingly. "Only the finest for my future partner," Vaisura said, raising a goblet filled with something sparkling and iridescent. "Let us toast to our union." Dion raised his own goblet reluctantly, unsure if he was drinking alien champagne or liquidized glow sticks. Sure." "Cheers." The nobles around the table watched in silence, their expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed horror. One leaned over to whisper to another, "Is he really going to drink that?" Dion, determined to lighten the mood, downed the entire goblet in one go. It burned like fire but left a strangely pleasant aftertaste. "Not bad," he said, smacking his lips. "Got a little kick to it." Vaisura's mandibles twitched in what Dion assumed was a smile. "Your boldness is admirable. Truly, you embody the spirit of thinking outside the box." "That phrase again," Dion muttered. "You know, it's just an expression. I wasn't trying to." "Silence," she said, cutting him off once more. "Actions speak louder than words. Your willingness to embrace our customs speaks volumes." The banquet continued with a series of increasingly awkward moments. At one point, Dion was presented with a ceremonial staff that he was supposed to wave in a specific pattern. Instead, he used it to play air guitar, earning a few stifled laughs from the younger nobles and horrified gasps from the elders. "Is this not correct?" he asked innocently, twirling the staff like a baton. Vaisura's mandibles twitched again, and she waved dismissively at her advisors, who looked ready to faint. "It is unconventional, but perhaps this is the human way." Dion shrugged, setting the staff down. "Sure, let's go with that." As the evening wore on, Vaisura leaned closer to him, her expression unreadable. "Dion, your ways continue to challenge my understanding. But I believe this is why you are the partner I need." Dion stared at her, struggling to find the right words. "Look, Vaisura, you're great and all, but I think we might have a little, communication issue. Nonsense, she replied. Our union will bridge the gap between our species. Together, we shall show the universe the strength of thinking outside the box. Dion groaned, realizing there was no way to untangle this mess without making it worse. Sure. Outside the box. That's me. Vaisura raised her goblet again. To Dion of the jar, my partner in thought and action. To misunderstandings, Dion muttered under his breath, clinking his goblet against hers. The morning after the banquet, Dion woke to find a small army of Terrasian artisans gathered outside his jar. They were constructing what appeared to be an enormous pedestal with intricate carvings. What's all this? Dion called out, rubbing his eyes. One of the artisans, a hunched Terrasian with a glinting chisel, replied, a throne, of course. For the queen and her partner. Dion nearly tripped over his own feet. Throne? Partner? Oh no, no, no. This is getting way out of hand. Before he could argue further, Vaisura arrived, resplendent as ever. Good morning, Dion of the jar, she greeted, her mandibles twitching in what he now recognized as smug satisfaction. Preparations are underway for the formal union ceremony. Dion groaned, planting his face in his hands. We really need to talk about this whole partner thing. It's not what you think. Your humility is endearing, she said, dismissing his concerns. But there is no need to downplay your worth. Together, we shall redefine unity. Her entourage began explaining the day's itinerary, a parade, a clay molding competition, and a speech Dion was expected to give to solidify their bond. The last bit made him choke on his breakfast. A speech? What am I supposed to say? Hi, I'm Dion, and this is all a big misunderstanding? You will speak from the heart, Vaisura said solemnly. Your words, like your actions, will inspire. The first event was the parade, and Dion found himself sitting on a jar-shaped float, waving awkwardly to a crowd of cheering Taraxians. The float's design, complete with handles, elicited a snort from Dion. Handles for extra grip, huh? Subtle. Your humor continues to amuse me, Vaisura said, seated beside him on the float. Taraxians value practicality in all things. The parade ended at a massive arena where the clay molding competition was to take place. Dion, much to his horror, was a featured participant. He stood before a giant slab of clay, completely out of his depth. So, what exactly am I supposed to mold here? He asked, glancing at Vaisura. Something that symbolizes our union, she replied. Perhaps a vessel of some sort? Dion stared at the clay, then back at the queen, and sighed. A vessel. Right. No pressure. Rolling up his sleeves, he began shaping the clay with exaggerated movements, making a point of being as over-the-top as possible. By the time he finished, the resulting vessel looked like a jar with comically large handles and a spout in an anatomically questionable location. The crowd gasped. Vaisura's mandibles twitched furiously, though whether from shock or amusement, Dion couldn't tell. This creation is bold, she said finally. Dion crossed his arms, grinning. Bold's one word for it. Despite the awkwardness, the crowd erupted into applause. Dion bowed dramatically, muttering to himself, when in doubt, go big or go home. The final event of the day was the speech. Dion stood on a raised platform, surrounded by thousands of Taraxians, all eagerly awaiting his words. He glanced at Vaisura, who nodded encouragingly, and then at the sea of expectant faces. Clearing his throat, he began, hi. So, this has been quite the experience. He paused, trying to find the right balance between honesty and not offending an entire species. Back on Earth, we have a saying, life is what you make of it. And, I guess that applies here, too. You've made a lot out of this situation. More than I ever expected. The crowd murmured in agreement, clearly taking his words as profound. Emboldened, Dion continued, the thing about jars is, they're not just containers. They're also, metaphors. For potential. You never know what's inside until you open one up. Vaisura's eyes gleamed with admiration. Beautifully said, Dion. Thanks, he muttered, stepping back before he could dig himself into a deeper hole. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Vaisura took his hand, raising it triumphantly. Let this day mark the beginning of a new era, she proclaimed. As the celebrations wound down, Dion found himself sitting beside Vaisura, exhausted but oddly amused by the day's events. So, he said, leaning back, did this live up to your expectations? Far beyond, she replied, her tone sincere. You continue to challenge me in ways I never anticipated. Well, that's me, he said with a smirk. Always thinking outside the box. As the sun set on Taraxia, Dion finally managed to sneak away from the throngs of admirers and well-wishers. He retreated to his jar, hoping for a moment of peace, but his solitude was short-lived. Vaisura arrived, her exoskeleton gleaming under the pale glow of the twin moons. You're avoiding the celebration, she observed, stepping closer to the jar. Dion sighed. Celebrating what, exactly? A misunderstanding that's gotten so out of hand I'm one speech away from being crowned the king of pots and pans? You underestimate the significance of what we've achieved today, she said, her tone steady but not unkind. Your presence here has bridged a gap between our species. It is no small feat. He looked up at her, exasperated. Look, Vaisura, I get it. You're trying to do something noble here, and I respect that. But you've got to see this for what it is, a big, weird cosmic joke. Her mandibles twitched, a sign he'd come to recognize as her version of raised eyebrows. A joke? Yeah, he said, leaning forward. You're a queen. You've got responsibilities, a whole planet to run. And me? I'm just a guy living in a jar, making bad puns. You don't need me for this grand vision of unity or whatever. Vaisura tilted her head, considering his words. Perhaps you see yourself as insignificant, but your actions have inspired many. Your ability to defy convention, to challenge expectations, it is a quality my people admire. Dion let out a soft laugh. You've got a funny way of looking at things. On Earth, I'd just be the weird guy everyone avoids at parties. Then it is fortunate you are here, where your uniqueness is valued, she replied. There was a pause before she added, however, I must confess. I may have misinterpreted your wish. He blinked, caught off guard. You think? I believed your desire for a partner who thinks outside the box was a plea for companionship, for someone who could match your unconventional nature. But now I see it may have been metaphorical. Bingo, he said, throwing up his hands. That's what I've been trying to say. Her mandibles twitched again, this time in what he could only describe as embarrassment. I acted hastily, then. I sought to honor your wish without fully understanding its intent. Dion softened, recognizing the vulnerability in her voice. Hey, no harm done. I mean, it's not every day a guy gets a parade and his own statue. He paused, then added with a grin, though I could have done without the jar-shaped float. She chuckled, a low, resonant sound that surprised him. Perhaps I should have consulted you more thoroughly before taking action. Yeah, that might have helped, he said, smirking. But hey, live and learn. They sat in silence for a moment, the distant hum of the city filling the air. Finally, Vaisura spoke again. Dion, your perspective has been enlightening. Even in your frustrations, you offer insights that challenge my understanding. Well, you're not so bad yourself, he admitted. For a queen, you're surprisingly down to earth. She nodded, accepting the compliment with grace. Then let us consider this a lesson for both of us. From now on, I will strive to listen more carefully. And you, perhaps you will find that even a jar can be a place of influence. Dion laughed, shaking his head. You really know how to spin things, don't you? It is a skill honed over years of leadership, she replied, her tone light. And perhaps a necessity when dealing with humans who live in jars. Fair point, he said, leaning back. So, what happens now? Am I off the hook, or are you planning another parade? Vaisira smiled, a subtle gesture but one he'd learned to recognize. I think we've had enough parades for now. But I would like to continue our discussions. There is much I can learn from you, Dion of the Jar. Discussions, huh? He rubbed his chin theatrically. Well, I do charge a consulting fee. She tilted her head, intrigued. And what would that fee be? Start with a lid for this jar, he said with a grin. It gets drafty at night. Vaisira laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that echoed through the quiet streets. Consider it done. As she turned to leave, Dion called after her. Hey, Vaisira. She paused, looking back. Yes? For what it's worth, he said, you're not half bad at thinking outside the box yourself. Her mandibles twitched in amusement. High praise, coming from you. And with that, she disappeared into the night, leaving Dion to his thoughts. He leaned back inside his jar, staring up at the twin moons. Well, he muttered to himself, that was a day.